USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the USCHO Weekend Review podcast on Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. And before we dive in, a reminder that this episode is sponsored by the NCHA Frozen Four. April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Jim, I think this has to be the longest weekend of playoffs we've ever seen. It started on Wednesday night and ended on Monday night. So 5 days of hockey, or I guess 6 if you do the math. But anyway, some interesting results, a lot of upsets, and a lot of things being decided in the PairWise rankings.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. It was a long weekend. You think of the Atlantic Hockey starting on Wednesday with the Sacred Heart RIT series. And then because of travel delays for Colorado College, the Western Michigan CC game, which, produced a huge upset. We've talked about it. I think, I don't want to say we predicted it, but we talked about the fact that CC was a very hot team coming in. They upset Western Michigan, knocked them out of the NCAA tournament and knocked them out of the NCHC tournament. And I think you saw tons of upsets this week. It takes back kind of what we had to talk about last week, which was the lack of parity in the first round. And the second round had put us on the map again of any team can win. It doesn't matter. Just get to that round of the playoffs and you'll see some upsets. And there were some big ones across the nation. And a lot of things changed in terms of the pairwise. There's now teams that probably didn't feel like they had a lot of hope. They have a little more hope. And there's teams that entered last weekend with the knowledge that you win 2 games and you're probably locked in the tournament. Now they're either on the bubble or out. So, very interesting weekend, very long weekend. It was not a weekend in essence. I should really say week, I guess, instead of weekend. But we decided a lot, and we've learned a lot in the last 6 days.
Well, this we know from the weekend's results, Jim. Anybody who's 17 or below in the pairwise and who is done with the season schedule, they are out of it. That means Western Michigan, Union, North Dakota, Lowell, Minnesota, with their losses during that stretch, they're done. There's no way for them to get into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, there's some teams down there that are still going. Colorado College, as we mentioned, Boston University, Brown, Boston College. There's a number of teams, and all the Atlantic teams still alive. They all have hope. But yeah, everybody else has lost it. I was at Lowell on Sunday and called that game for UMass Lowell, and seeing some of the faces of seniors coming off the ice and the pure emotion of losing, it's over. And on the other side, Boston University, they had some guys that seniors or not seniors, guys that are just going to go to the NHL from that team. The emotion to keep their season alive was very pure. And that they now know that they're 2 games away from an NCAA tournament, that it's now matchups are set. They know who they're playing. They know who they have to beat. They know what business they have to take care of. And that goes in every league now. You're in that situation. And then you go to the Big Ten, where it literally Penn State against Notre Dame, and the winner will win the Big Ten championship, but will also earn that bid to the NCAA tournament, because neither of those teams can get in without winning the tournament.
This is also the time where teams can look back and say coulda, woulda, shoulda. We talked with Brad Schlossman last week about North Dakota and how the sweep at the hands of last place Canisius put them down about 10 spots in the pairwise. North Dakota still probably would have an at-large opportunity. Maybe Lowell with a game or 2 here would be in the same situation. You probably say the same thing about Western Michigan and Union. Now, these are teams, Western Michigan, 21 wins, Union, 20 wins, North Dakota, 18 wins, and they find themselves out of the tournament.
Yeah, and it does come down to the magic number. I always say that 23 is your safe number. I do think we might possibly have some teams that could have 23 wins. Lake Superior could potentially miss the tournament with 23 wins. But I always say that 23 wins, and I have a colleague in the business that says 22 wins when you end your regular season. If you can get to that number, you usually make it. I don't know if the math always holds up, but you just mentioned 21, 20, 18. Not enough. You're close. You're really close, but you need to flip a game. North Dakota needed to flip those 2 games with Canisius. Lowell needed to flip 2 games with Providence, and they'd be in. But the inability to do that is what you can go back and do. It's coulda, shoulda, woulda. But you find the games at this time of year that, boy, if we just had a better weekend those nights, we'd be still hunting.
On the other hand, one less win for somebody like Arizona State would probably put them on the outside because, well, anyway, why don't we say what we do know now? We do know this. St. Cloud State, UMass, and Minnesota State are locks for first round top seeds in the regionals. They cannot be bumped out.
That I do believe that is safe. And then we can go a little bit further and say that Minnesota Duluth, Quinnipiac, Denver, Ohio State, Northeastern, Clarkson, and Arizona State, they're all locks for the tournament. You can add in 2 other teams, and that will be the Atlantic Hockey champion and the winner of Notre Dame, Penn State, and the Big Ten. All of those teams are in the tournament. So basically at this point, there are 9 teams, 8. It's a little confusing on the math because you have to think about whoever's not the winner of Notre Dame, Penn State. They can't win. They can't get in the tournament, but they're still alive. So there's basically 21 teams still with NCAA hopes. 12 of them, though, are locks right now.
And when you look at the teams that are playing for those last 4 spots, you've got most of the ECAC playoffs, Cornell, Harvard, and Brown. They're all after it. Providence has to sit and wait after getting beaten in the quarterfinal round in Hockey East by BC. BU and BC both have to wait. Colorado College needs to win in the NCHC, their first trip to that in NCHC history. And also Bowling Green needs to win. They're at number 13 right now in the PairWise, but they are in risk of getting bumped out if they lose the championship game to Minnesota State. So there are a lot of different scenarios too. And of course you can play with them all with a PairWise predictor at USCHO.com. And this week is always a lot of fun for people. I don't know how much we cost the U.S. and probably Canadian economies with people playing with a PairWise predictor at the office during this week, but
it's not nearly as many people.
Don't even ask.
It's not nearly as many people that will be. A lot of
fun that you can have with that.
It's nowhere near the number of people who are watching the NCAA basketball tournament on Thursday at their office and not doing work. So we're not costing as much as basketball. The one thing we can say, obviously there's a lot of teams that are below that 16th spot that are still alive. And that is what's, I think, making this a pretty exciting postseason. You have all the Atlantic hockey teams, obviously Boston College, Boston University in hockey. You have Brown, you have Colorado College. I don't think I'm missing any. I think that's everything. But, well, I guess you can say Penn State right now is kind of on the outside, but that's a pretty simple one. One game, you win it, you're in, and it's an automatic bid. It's not really an at-large bid technically. So there are 3 leagues with a lot of hope and a lot of potential for teams to still come basically out of the grave and make the tournament. Because that's everybody's season probably fell pretty much on life support when you're looking at teams like Brown. Brown, don't forget, they had to get out of a first round, then they had to upset another team. That's a big step for them. BCBU, Colorado College, they all just had to win one round. But Brown is the team that it's going to be a long stride to think that they could win the ECAC, but they've gotten through 2 rounds of playoffs right now, and that's pretty big itself.
Well, and to beat the top team in the league or one of the top teams in Quinnipiac and to have beaten them basically 3 times in a row, twice in the playoffs and once previous, is pretty amazing. And, that speaks well for Brown's opportunity in this. But, Jim, let's look at how many teams may make it into the NCAAs from each of the leagues. We know that the Big Ten will get to Ohio State is already in, and then either Notre Dame or Penn State will make it in. In the ECAC, 4 or 5 teams are likely to get in. A surprisingly strong year for that league. You get 5 in if you have the right combination, and Brown wins that conference. In the NCHC, 3 teams are a lock right now. You could get a 4th one in with Colorado College. Atlantic Hockey will get 1 team in. WCHA, 1 or 2 teams. Bowling Green with a win over Minnesota State for the league championship would mean 2 from the WCHA. Arizona State is already in, but in Hockey East is interesting because you could have 2 teams in from that league or as many as 4.
I guess, yeah. I'm trying to line this up with out of conference records, and it doesn't line up right now. ECAC had the basically the second weakest out of conference record, behind only Atlantic Hockey, even the third WCHA. When Atlantic Hockey had a 250 winning percentage, WCHA with a 357. And then the ECAC had a 490 winning percentage, and they could put 5 teams in this tournament, which is kind of crazy, but it also talks to the success of Ivies. And if the Ivy League schools are successful with the shortened season, they don't play as many games, they don't have as many chances to lose games. If they can be successful in the shortened schedule, you get more teams to be near the bubble or higher in the PairWise, and it's bubble. Let's not kid ourselves, because of the fact that the teams that are in that league that are not locks right now include Harvard, they include Cornell, they include Brown, all 3 still playing, but all of them technically could miss the NCAA tournament. The only locks in that league right now are Clarkson and Quinnipiac. So they have the most to play for this weekend, certainly. But it's a little off in terms of aligning. You talk to anybody that understands the math, and they will tell you that you can align your out of conference winning percentage with the number of teams you get in. And even if it's not the number of teams, it's the seedings. You might have 3 teams. You might have a crappy out of conference records, get 3 teams in, and they'll all be low seeds, 4 seeds. But this is right now we're looking at a number 2 seed in Quinnipiac, a number 3 seed in Clarkson, probably a number 4 seed in Cornell, Harvard, and possibly Brown. So it's a little off in terms of how the ECAC works, given that they didn't have a strong out of conference schedule.
Well, I think some of that ends up being how well an individual team does in that. So if your average is sub 500 in ECAC, but there's a wide band there that brings that average down, then the teams that have been very successful will be the ones that'll float to the top. And I think that was this year.
You can look at teams like St. Lawrence, like Colgate, like RPI that didn't have good seasons at all. So the bottom was a bottom in that league, and rightfully so, everybody got swept out. Even Princeton, you can throw Princeton in there. They got swept out of the first round of the playoffs. But that top 8 was pretty strong, given the fact that now 5 of those 8 still have NCAA hopes.
Well, Jim, let's take a break, and then we'll look at what happened around the 6 leagues over the weekend. You're listening to the USCHO Weekend Review podcast, sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot, saved by Morris. Takes the shot, Ricardo!
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Continuing with the USCHO Weekend Review podcast, I'm Ed Trefzger. He's Jim Connelly, and let's take a quick look around the leagues over the weekend. Let's start with Hockey East. We brought up about them. There were a couple of upsets in Hockey East over the weekend.
Yeah, Boston College, Boston University, there's 2 of your perennial favorites in the league, if you will. Down years for both of them, no doubt, but they had great showings in the playoffs, and both of them able to pull out their series on the road in Game 3. BU kind of dominating Lowell in that third game, and then Boston College finding a way to win very late against Providence. And you can even look at New Hampshire. New Hampshire had a 3-goal lead on UMass on the first night. Obviously, top-seeded UMass. They've been a very strong team. They're going to be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. New Hampshire had a 3-goal lead and lost it on the first night, and then had to play double overtime, lost in double overtime. At that point, I think they kind of that was their fold. I don't want to say that they didn't have an effort on Saturday night, but I think they wore themselves out trying to win that first game, and that was enough of a beatdown. They lost 6-0 the second night. So you had your upsets. You had your teams hold serve. Northeastern, a 2-1 winner back-to-back nights over Maine. But for the most part, you're seeing a lot of hope from Boston College, Boston University. Those are two teams that have the pride. They didn't have good seasons, but they showed it in the playoffs.
In the ECAC, there was really only one upset round. We talked about Brown. A 2-1 overtime winner on Friday over Quinnipiac and 4-3 on Saturday over the Bobcats. But otherwise, the upper seeds held serve.
Yeah, it took Cornell a third game to get there. But, I look at Brown and maybe look more at Quinnipiac and how much did losing Chase Prisky for the weekend hurt Quinnipiac. And that's a very good player. He was suspended the last night of the regular season for kicking a Yale player. Got a 2-game suspension for it. And, the 2 games ended up being playoff games. Quinnipiac didn't advance. That's the first time in 20 years, going back all the way back to maybe the MAC. Definitely Atlantic Hockey, their entire time in the ECAC, which I think is 14 seasons. They had never not won their quarterfinal round. And for Quinnipiac, they did not advance. And that's almost as big of a storyline as anything that we've seen come out of the last weekend of the playoffs.
And I saw a tweet from Rand Pecknold that was humble about the loss and congratulatory to Brown.
Yeah, and I think he realized, and we've said it before, I think that Brown has been a pretty hot team down the stretch. They had some great success in the last few weekends. Did not have a good start to the year, but when you got them playing down the stretch, that was a tough team to beat, and they proved it against Quinnipiac.
Atlantic Hockey, we've talked to some of the coaches in that league, and everybody talks about how anybody can beat anybody. One coach told me that the difference between winning and losing in that league is how well you execute and what effort you put in that night. And we certainly saw that in the playoffs. 7 playoff series. 4 of the 7 won by the lower seed. Army won in the first round over Mercyhurst and moved on to the second round. But Army, the only one to lose to a higher seed. They were swept, or not swept. It was 3 games by AIC. But the other ones, number 2 Bentley went down at the hands of number 8 Robert Morris. Number 3 Air Force went down at the hands of number 6 Niagara, swept at Colorado Springs. And here's the really fun part about that. The second period of that game, Air Force outshot Niagara 19-2.
But the 2 shots went in.
The 2 shots went in a few seconds apart. Air Force had the first 13 shots of that game. Air Force with 43 shots on goal, plus Niagara blocked 23 shots in that game. So a 5-4 loss in what was territorially dominant by the Falcons.
Yeah, I mean, you're literally an Army win away on Sunday from having the top seed in this weekend's Final Four in Atlantic Hockey being the number 5 seed. You could have had a 5. Do my math here. 5, 7, 8, 10 was a potential, Ed. Am I right in saying
5, 6, 8, and 10.
5, 6, 8, and 10 could have been your seeds. So yeah, there was great parity in that league. We talked about how the standings were being crazy heading into the final weekend, and it proved out in the playoffs. It's just the number of teams that just seemed to have a lot of hope, a lot of heart, and top seeded teams. You go to Bentley. That's a team that had never really been there. Air Force had a lot of experience, and they didn't survive. But I guess it happens. that's why you play the games, and it was a great weekend. I think when you're thinking about who survived and who didn't, you have to look at some of the great seasons that went for naught because you couldn't get out of the first round of the playoffs.
Well, and then the craziest series was RIT and Sacred Heart. Played Wednesday, Thursday, Friday because there were events going on Saturday and Sunday at Webster Bank Arena where the Pioneers play. RIT got pummeled by Sacred Heart 9-4 on Wednesday, and those last two goals were at garbage time. All three RIT goaltenders played in that game. The next day, RIT comes back, goes out to a 5-0 lead, chases the starting goaltender for Sacred Heart, and it's a 7-3 game win for RIT. What's going to happen on the next night? Is it going to be 7-6? Is it going to be 1-0? Well, it ended up being 3-1 RIT, but it was 1-1 until 2 minutes and 20 seconds were left, and RIT scored and then got an empty netter. And maybe a mild upset, but probably not when you have 4 versus 5. But that really set the stage for Buffalo, and Bob DiGregorio, league commissioner's got to be happy because he has RIT and Niagara in the late game at Harbor Center, plus Robert Morris, who travels well. So attendance woes probably will not be a problem.
Well, and, this is a tournament that for so many years was played in Rochester, and you moved it out of Rochester because of, worries about attendance. You put it in Canisius up in Buffalo. Obviously, Canisius doesn't make it, but that's a small building, easy to fill. And I would guess that you're probably going to be sold out both nights because not that big of a building to have to actually fill. And you have some really good local draws. The commissioner has to be happy about that.
Well, let's look out west. The NCHC tournament didn't get over until Monday night. And for the first time in 4 years, one of the top 4 seeds did not make it to the Frozen Face-Off. And that was because Colorado College downed Western Michigan on Monday night by a score of 3-2.
And this will be Colorado College's first visit to the they call it the Frozen Face-Off, the Final Four of the league. I believe that, if my math is right, now all 8 teams have made it to that final weekend, and that's a good stamp for that league. We obviously talk about how strong that league can be, is all of those types of things. You had some pretty contestable series. You also go to the fact that North Dakota had to go to Denver, played close games both nights, but lost both nights, and North Dakota suddenly ends their season. So that league was tight, and I think you're going to have teams on the outside like Western and North Dakota that were very good teams that if they had gotten to the NCAA tournament easily, both of those teams probably might have had a chance to do something, maybe win a couple of games, get to a Frozen Four. Instead, they're going to be both on the outside looking in.
Colorado College, St. Cloud State, heavily favored will be St. Cloud, but Colorado College down the stretch went 6-3, 1 win over North Dakota, 2 wins over Denver, and 3 over Western Michigan in that stretch.
They were a hot team, and even the games they lost, they were losing in overtime. They were losing very close 1-goal games. They are a dangerous team. Mike Haviland just has this team playing good hockey right now. That's a pro coach right there, and I would not want to be playing them, especially in a one and done scenario like St. Cloud will face on Friday night.
And Alex Leclerc has been stellar in net for
and that's a big part of
Tigers. In the WCHA, we see the top seed Minnesota State prevailing in 2 games, and Bowling Green, they were the road team, but had a pretty decisive win over Northern Michigan on Friday, and then a 2-1 double overtime win on Saturday.
Yeah, two very good teams there coming out. Obviously, Minnesota State has been kind of the dominant team, and they're now going to play a 1-game championship on Saturday in Minnesota State. You got to think that, Mankato will be rocking that night. It will be a banged out building, probably sold out, I assume. And that will be a huge challenge for Bowling Green, but they're playing well. When you're a hot team in the playoffs, you like to ride the hand, and both of those teams are 2 tough opponents. That's a good game that's going to be played. That's, it's kind of I don't want to say that it's an overlooked championship. When you think about how things are built. But just like the Big Ten, they do everything, beforehand. They don't have a Final Four in essence in the league. You have, 2 semifinal series, but that one game, I would pay a lot to be at that one game on Saturday night, because I think it's going to be a great tale. It's a heavyweight bout.
Well, and Bowling Green has its further postseason on the line in that one, and that's another woulda, coulda, shoulda. They had a couple of bad losses in the last part of the season that are the difference between them already being in and needing to win this to go to the NCAAs.
Yeah, 25 wins. There's a lot of my stats that I threw out in the first half of the show about 23 is a good number, 22 wins by the time you enter regular season. Well, they did all those things, and they're still on the bubble. They need one more win to get in.
Well, let's go to the Big Ten. It seems like a long time ago now, since this is Tuesday, but Minnesota's overtime loss to Notre Dame ended what was a great final stretch for the Gophers on what is a questionable penalty. And a lot of it has to do with angles for the referees for what they could see. All of us in hindsight, seeing multiple camera angles, can agree that it was a terrible call. But if you're seeing it from a certain angle and maybe seeing it sold just a little bit, you might have a different opinion. But certainly Bob Motzko was upset, and understandably so.
Yeah, understandable. And, it's the human factor of the games is the officiating. And that was a premier crew that was on the game. That was one of the better crews that Big Ten has. And I have seen an angle that kind of was, from where the referee was. Obviously, not having a helmet cam, you couldn't have the exact angle, but pretty close. And the one thing you see is the stick get parallel to the ice and a player fall down. And when you think about those two things, in October, nobody's complaining about that. That's a hook in October, and always a hook. And that's the keep your stick on the ice. Don't put it parallel to the ice around somebody's waist. In March, it's different because it's now playoffs and games are on the line. End up being the power play that cost Minnesota the game. I get it. I get the anger. It's the wrong call, but that's the human factor of the game. And it's difficult to end your season. I think that Minnesota, if they had gotten past that and they win next week in a Big Ten championship game, they would have been one of the more dangerous teams in the NCAA tournament. But they didn't do it all year, and one call does not cost you a season.
The other matchup, Penn State with a decisive 5-1 win over Ohio State. So Ohio State has only played 35 NCAA games. They got the bye to this round in the Big Ten. So one playoff game, 5-1 down the stretch, one game in 27 days going into the NCAAs. Have you got to be worried about rust for the Buckeyes?
Well, we talked about it going into this weekend, that the fact that they hadn't played and that bye, it should be an advantage. You're playing at home, but it was not advantageous for Ohio State. It was something that worried me going into the game against Penn State. You don't know what you're going to get, and if your defense isn't strong and if your offense isn't going against Penn State, forget it. You have to be able to score goals when you're playing Penn State. There's another team out there that we haven't mentioned, but it's going to be very similar. You got to think of Arizona State. They haven't played a ton of games lately, and they lost their last two to Minnesota before the regular season ended. So all those situations, very difficult. I think it's really hard when you don't play a lot. It's hard to simulate games. It's hard to keep guys in game mode when you're not playing, and it proved itself in Ohio State. They're going to be a number 2 seed likely when this tournament starts, and they're going to have a hard go of it in a regional.
Well, Jim, this Sunday night we're planning at 6:30 p.m. Eastern to be live with Weekend Review, as at 7 p.m. the matchups for the NCAA tournament will be announced. We'll be able to look back at all the weekend playoff championships and also prognosticate a little bit, and then provide some analysis after the brackets are announced. So we're really looking forward to that. It's nice to have this announced in the evening instead of early Sunday morning.
Yeah, it's the start of live. live broadcast for us, and we'll be live from the Frozen Four as well, 4 times from Wednesday through Saturday in Buffalo. And it all starts this week. We're going to have some, for what NCAA hockey has become, we'll probably know a lot about the brackets by the time we get on the air. But you never know when the surprise is going to happen, when the committee is going to move a team that we didn't expect to get moved. And that will be the fun part of it, the true live part of our show on Sunday night.
Yep. And then we'll have to figure out why they did it, because we'll know who the 16 teams are with very little doubt. But like you said, for travel, for intra-league matchups, they're going to move things around a little bit, and for attendance. That's also a part of it, too. Well, that'll wrap up Weekend Review for this week. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you Sunday night.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.